Hello and welcome to the Piccadilly Shopping Guided Tour Photo Run. This is part 2 of the 5 km West End shopping photo run. We're now going to move on to the Piccadilly route, and we start off in roughly the same sort of location, and we're going to just give you an idea of the map. We start off outside the station, we come back and we go past the Ritz and the Wolsey as we did before, but we turn right into St James's Street, which would bring you down to St James's Palace and then eventually into St James's Park. But then we take the first turning on your left and we're going to go along Jermyn Street. Now this is one of the main places in London for gentlemen's clothing, the other being Savile Row, which is further up, and this is where the tailors for your suits generally come from. And then we come back onto Piccadilly past Fortnum and Mason's and then continue all the way down until we get to Piccadilly Circus. And then here is the map of the shops that you would see along Piccadilly. There's not a great number of clothes shops, but there are places to eat and drink. There's the arcades, there is the places of learning, the Royal Academy, a number of bookshops and a number of specialist shops, as well as having one of the oldest churches in the area, St James's Church, which is the parish church of this area of London. Within Jermyn Street, you can see that there are a large array of very specialist shops which are catering for the gentleman's fashions of shoes and shirts and suits and cigars. Okay, so let's go and give you a little bit of history about Piccadilly. Now here we have a map of Piccadilly in the 1850s, and there's a couple of things to bear in mind when we look at the history of this particular area. You will see that it's just north of St James's Palace, and this would have been the court area surrounded in essence by countryside north of Piccadilly. But the area of Piccadilly started to be developed from about 1611 onwards. There was a certain fashion at around the time of the Elizabethan area of wearing lace collars called piccadilles. Now there's a picture of one here. They were very fancy. The Queen Elizabeth I used to have them, sometimes called ruffs, when they were all put together. But Robert Baker made a fortune in manufacturing these, and he had a house built in this location called Piccadilly Hall, and there was a number of other sizable buildings because this was a very elite area to live in. So there was areas such as Burlington House, which still is there today, Clarendon House, which eventually turned into Bond Streets. There was Berkeley House and Devonshire House. But when you get to Charles II time in the period of 1660s, he was a king who brought back partying, so this area of London started to become much more fashionable and lively. Now he married Catherine of Braganza, and therefore this street originally was called Portugal Street, and it only became Piccadilly in 1743. Now there's two interesting facts about Catherine of Braganza. One of it is that she did come from Portugal, so that was the street, but she brought to England tea, so she made tea a royal speciality. But she's also famous for making Green Park because she caught Charles II picking flowers for one of his mistresses. So she banned any flowers inside that park, and that seems to be the case still today. The edge of Piccadilly, where you see the Ritz Hotel, which is almost where we start, was the main stopping point into and out of London. This would have been the route out to Bath, the A4. And there was a coaching in there called the Old White Horse Cellar, which is roughly on the site where the Ritz Hotel is today. Now there was a hotel built in 1884 called the Walsingham, and there was also one nearby called the Bath Hotel. Now, the Ritz Hotel in 1906 pulled these both down and made the Ritz into what it is today. If we go to the other end of the route, we get to Piccadilly Circus. Now this was originally called Regent Circus, and a circus at the time was just a turning circle where coaches could come in and they could either go up Regent Street or they could go down towards the palace at St James or on towards Westminster. It became Piccadilly Circus later on, more in 1906, where the tube station was installed. In the middle of the street we have St James's Church. Now this is the parish church of this area. It was built in 1684 by Christopher Wren, and it is still a functioning church today. This particular part of London served the general needs of the area, so it had a number of learned societies. Near where the Royal Academy are, it had 5 learned societies, as well as an art gallery. It also had shops to serve the gentlemen's needs, such as Savile Row and Jermyn Street, but also the clubs down in Pall Mall, which is a bit further south. It had pubs and restaurants. It had bookshops. Obviously, it had a department store, Fortnum and Mason's, and it had pavements. So that meant the shoppers and the people using this particular part of London were kept clean and dry. It was also essential because it had links to both Bond Street and Regent Street, as well as Hyde Park and exits from the city. And it allowed the individuals who worked there to either go down to the palace or go to the courts or to Westminster Parliament, or even out towards the east to work in the city. And the pictures we have here show London in about 1900. This is at the start of the photo run in just off Green Park, and the other one shows the end of it outside Piccadilly. Okay, so now let's have a look at the route itself as if we were running it at speed. Now we start at Green Park Station and then we head up towards Devonshire House, which is in front of us, and then when we get to Piccadilly itself we turn right and we go past the Ritz, and we just keep on going along until we get to the second turning on our right, which will bring us down into St James. As we go down there we turn left just by the Beretta building into Jermyn Street, and then we continue along there past the Piccadilly Arcade, past the numerous shops serving the dress needs of a gentleman, and then we go up Duke Street by the side of Fortnum and Mason's, and then when we come out onto Piccadilly itself we'll be right outside the Royal Academy, and we can take a little detour up to Burlington Arcade, but then we can just head off in an easterly direction towards Piccadilly Circus, passing Hanchards for books, and then on to St James's Church, and then continuing along past the Meridian Hotel, Waterstones, and then eventually ending up at Piccadilly Circus, and we'll see that we have Lillywhite's, the famous sports department store, on our right before we end up past Eros or Anti-Eros, and we end up looking at the lights at Piccadilly Circus. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at some of the sights that you can see along the Piccadilly photo run, and we're going to look at it in 2 perspectives. One, we're going to look at it from the route as if you just went straight down Piccadilly, and the second one we're going to be looking at it as if you were going down Jermyn Street. Now one way of looking at the sights along the route is to consider yourself as a Victorian gentleman. During the Victorian era, when someone was called a Victorian gentleman, it meant that they did not need to work in order to earn money or perform any manual labour to live and survive. And you were generally a person who subscribed to a set of etiquette, which also meant that you never inflicted pain onto anyone. So let's go down this journey as if we were a gentleman in that period and deciding what we would do as we were going along Piccadilly. Okay, so let's start this at Piccadilly, and as we end up coming out of Green Park Station, we will see the Ritz in front of us where we could stop for dinner or maybe have spent the night before heading off to one of the learned societies inside the Royal Academy. Now this is a picture of what the Royal Academy would have looked like in late Victorian times. As we go a bit further along Piccadilly, we could alternatively have stayed in Albany Court, which was a court just for bachelors, very well suited to this part of London. We could have gone to Fortnum and Mason's around the department stores and bought either food or other items from within inside the store. Alternatively, we could go to Henchard's and have a look through some of the books. And this is a building that used to be a gallery for paintings, and there was, around the Victorian times, this would have been the Egyptian Hall. A bit further along we have come across St James's Church in Piccadilly, which I mentioned was designed and built by Christopher Wren. We may want to stop at the Meridian Hotel for dinner or to meet some guests, or go to Cordings next door to buy some hunting gear. A bit further along we come to Waterstones, which is the biggest bookshop in London. Now this used to be Simpson the Strand for gentlemen's menswear before it moved off, and then we eventually arrive at the statue of Eros, but in fact is Anti-Eros, which is the god of unrequited love, and he is on top of the Shaftesbury Memorial, which is what it's actually called. And then as we see here, we've got Lily White's and the Criterion Theatre, so we can purchase the items that we need for our sporting events, as well as go to the Criterion Theatre for both a meal and to see a play. Finally, we finish off at Piccadilly Circus, enjoying the lights. Now, alternatively, we can look at the Jermyn Street tour. This would be where we would go and procure the items for our gentleman's wardrobe. So we may want to stop and go to Lock & Co and get our hat just before we go into Jermyn Street. And just at the corner of Jermyn Street we have Beretta, which focuses on hunting gear. Further up the road is a Piccadilly Arcade, which provides a number of smaller shops. We can pick up some fine cigars from Daffod's, get ourselves a good suit from here, or get an English suit from Dunhill's next door. Then there's also a place where Crockett's and Jones for our shoes, and then there's lots of places along Jermyn Street for shirts and other gentlemen's accessories. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the overall tour of Piccadilly, and now we'll move on to Regent Street.